Marc was a very strange guy. I mean, he had all these qualities. He was instinctively brilliant. He was arrogant. He was narcissistic. He was self-centered. He was generous. He was kind-hearted.
I thought he was very interesting. I thought he was very charming. I thought he was different.
He was very outgoing. He had this kind of showbiz aura about him, even before he was famous.
His early age, he wanted to be a star. He wanted to be a rock and roll star. He knew he had talent.
He was extremely ambitious, and he was very sort of calculating. I think he had a very good instinct for the market.
I learned later that he was also prone to exaggeration, and just making up complete blatant lies to further his career.
There's Marc Bolan, the rock star, which is a facade. Then there was Mark Feld, who I actually got to know at one stage, who was quite insecure and introvert.
I met Marc in my office at Melody Maker in Fleet Street, and I remember seeing this guy wandering around the corridor with corkscrew hair, and at that point we went for a chat and a drink in our local pub, and he explained to me that he was forming a band, and I said, well, how many people in the band? 2. It was just going to be him and a guy called Steve Peregrine Took. And I said, well, have you got your equipment together? He said, oh yes, we bought it all at Woolworths.
I had a brief from my boss to find a band of my own to produce, and until that time I was my boss's assistant. My boss was Denny Cordell, famous record producer who produced Joe Cocker and The Move and people like that. So I opened up a copy of International Times, and I just looked to see who was playing that night, and there was this group called Tyrannosaurus Rex, and I remember seeing their name week after week. So it was my very first night of talent scouting, and I went to the pub and waited until 8 o'clock until the band was advertised to go on. And I walked down the stairs, and I could hear the music coming up through the stairwell. And I thought it was very unusual. It wasn't rock music, it was kind of folky. And Marc Bolan was playing with Steve Peregrine Took, sitting on the floor, sitting on a carpet. And I was mesmerized. And yes, I did speak to him that night, and I was deferred to him by Steve Peregrine Took because I wasn't even sure that Marc could speak English.
Tyrannosaurus Rex, when they first came out, were basically a duo. They were Marc Bolan and Steve Took, and Tyrannosaurus Rex was a folk duo, if you like.
Well, Tyrannosaurus Rex had a great cult following. They really did very, very well on the university circuit and at festivals. People either loved it or hated it. They couldn't understand Marc's vocal style. He had this very high-pitched, whinnying, sort of bleating.
Not really done much, to be quite honest, as far as sales were concerned, but showed us the creative output of Mr. Bolan's mind.
He was very poetic, and also, you know, the lyrics of the music, I think he was very, you know, innovative, but then also was very basic and vague in a sense, but there was probably a lot more meaning there. But I think where he found his, you know, it was like the sensuality of the expression of the words.
Touch girl of the marshes, a kiss is a whip of the moon. Dance dances a dancing to the hum of a sunny June. Oh, elemental child. Oh, yeah, elemental child.
I asked him if I could produce his records. I told him I was a record producer and I worked for Denny Cordell. And he said, well, you're the 7th or 8th record producer who came this week to see us. I don't know who I'm going to go with, but John Lennon was here last night, and I'll probably go with him. And I went, oh, okay, and I believed him. I turned around dejected, and he said, wait a minute, can I have your phone number?
You look like a zebra. Your sunken face is like a galleon, caught with mysteries of the Spanish main. Oh, Deborah.
I went to work the next day. I got there about 10 a.m. and I told my boss that I saw this fantastic group. I described them in detail, and he put his arms behind his head and he was listening pensively, and the phone rang, and it was about 10:30 by this time, and it was Marc Bolan phoning from the street. And he said, Steve and I just happened to be in the neighborhood. Could we come up and audition for Denny Cordell? They came into the office with this carpet rolled up with some string around it, an acoustic guitar with no case, and it had no G-string peg either. I mean, they were really, ragamuffins, these two. And they laid out their carpet, sat on the carpet, and went through the entire set. They just didn't play 1 or 2 songs. They just didn't stop singing for about 35, 40 minutes. And Denny was enthralled, and so was I. I couldn't believe that this was happening, that they would prefer us over John Lennon. So that was the audition. It was quite an amazing experience.
Tyrannosaurus Rex were different. Nobody else was really doing an acoustic duo. There was the uniqueness of the songs and the material. However, at the same time, it's quite firmly rooted in its time. I have to admit, I find most of the first album certainly is virtually unlistenable.
Like all first albums, Marc was in good shape and the songs were in great shape. I mean, he had been writing them for years, and now here was his chance to record them. So it really didn't take that long to do the basic tracks. Right after we'd finish a song, instead of proceeding to the next song, they'd pick up the instruments, the overdub instruments, or do doo-wops, do backup vocals and all that. And we'd finish the song, each song would be finished within an hour, and then we would proceed to the next song. So within the first 2 days, we did the entire 14 songs, including a single that didn't appear on that album called Deborah. Deborah was the first Tyrannosaurus Rex single. We managed to do Deborah and a B-side, and so 16 tracks in all, including a visit from John Peel, who came to the studio and he read a short story that Marc had written. We did all this stuff in 2 days. And then we spent the next 2 days mixing. So it worked out really good. Everything was just right. I mean, getting John Peel not only to read the story, but also to be the champion of Tyrannosaurus Rex was just godsend.
He had a very close friendship with Marc, which I think started simply through Marc sending him early tapes and things of Tyrannosaurus Rex, knowing that John was a champion of the underdog, knowing that John was somebody who'd get behind young, precocious talent.
When he had a disco, John Peel disco, playing records, that's what some of us do, he would insist that Tyrannosaurus Rex were on the bill. And then he'd split the dosh. Beautiful cat.
The first albums were great fun. They were very good. I liked them, actually. A lot of people were charmed by them. And he did seem to be doing quite experimental music.
Both Marc and I were learning how to make records. We didn't quite get it right yet. We thought this Tyrannosaurus Rex, only because it's different, it's going to sell millions of records, because it's unusual. And little did I know, and little did he know, that you have to meet the public at least halfway. So I would say, if anything, Marc learned how to simplify his writing and make lyrics that were more understandable and come up with melodies and sounds that were more familiar.
Tyrannosaurus Rex were a pretty successful band on the underground scene. The first single, Deborah, just narrowly failed to make the top 30. The second single, 1 Inch Rock, got to something like number 28. They quickly developed a strong following.
Tyrannosaurus Rex.
On a qui? Ti quoi?
I saw Tyrannosaurus Rex playing at all the big festivals. Like, for example, the ill-fated 1968 Isle of Wight Festival, which was turned into a bit of a disaster for everybody because a great gale blew up. And then poor Tyrannosaurus Rex had to come on and perform in the freezing cold. And you could barely see Marc because he would always squat on his haunches And with Steve next to him rattling on the bongos, it was very hard to actually see them at all.
I said to him that I thought he should really think about whether he shouldn't, go electric, so that he could stand up so that people could see him. Low stage, sitting down, no one, people standing up, no one beyond the first 3 rows could see him. So I thought, well, if you stood up, that might help. If you had an electric guitar, you better amplify it so people would better hear it. And, isn't that a good idea? No, that wasn't a good idea. It was ignored completely.
One of the most important figures in his early career, somebody that really can't be given enough credit, was his wife, was June. Because she was a very smart cookie.
I bought this whole thing as to who he was and what it was about, and it was about the kids, man. It was really beautiful, and everything is lovely, and we're moving on a higher plane. And then he started having a romance with our secretary called June Child.
And she describes him somewhere as looking like a combination of Bob Dylan and Biggles. And she sort of fell in love with him almost at first sight.
She wasn't doing anything because she was sort of sitting there looking into his eyes, and he was sitting there looking into her eyes and sitting cross-legged and playing guitar to her. Or, it was like, oh no, this is just sickening. So we said, look, June, you can do one of 3 things. You can leave and go off and live with Mark and just get on with your life. You can stay with us, which is our preferred solution, but be professional, so that of course you can do phone calls and things, but let's not have any snogging in the office. Or you can you can look after Mark within the office, but all in the context of, in other words, you can stay as our assistant, but you can be in charge of looking after Mark. So that evening, a note came through the door, the note that I have always regretted losing, and it said, "I'm going to leave because I can't have you messing with my art by telling me to go electric." Words to that effect. Very small note, sort of torn off of an envelope, put through the door. And in hindsight, you have to say, well, that was probably an excuse. He thought, right, June is the person who does all the work. She does it. I don't need these old geezers in the back. I'm paying them money. If I pay June, I'm paying myself money. We can do it ourselves.
She knew about promotion and about getting people on the road. And it was her energies and togetherness that actually got him moving as Tyrannosaurus Rex, and she did a lot of hard work.
She was his mother, his wife, his lover, his secretary. She did everything. Stability. She enabled him to write and to be creative.
Mark was quite a self-contained little unit, really, and in the early days he was quite broke. He had the support of June, his wife, and they lived together in a tiny flat in Blenheim Crescent. Mark's studio, which was very funny, it was in the corner was a little curtain, and it said in handwriting, like a child's handwriting, "Toadstool Studios," it said. And in this little booth was a microphone and a tape recorder and a guitar, and that's where Mark wrote his songs and got it all together. And I remember actually sitting with Mark one evening, and he gave me a pair of bongos, so I was Steve Peregrine Took for half an hour.
Mark did believe in the dream of my people had sky in their hair, but now they wear stars on their brow. I mean, he did believe in that kind. He read Hermann Hesse. I don't think he ever understood Hermann Hesse, but he read him. He read Tolkien, which I think he did understand at least to some extent. But I'm not sure that the dream of Elvis was very far from his mind.
I always thought Mark was special, Once I hipped to what the vibe was. I thought he was a very special cat. And, my job was to propagate him, and a bit of head holding, a bit of hand holding, a lot of it is playing the right records to people, you know, and Marc would be at home saying, listen to this beat, you know, and he'd play an Elvis bootleg. The Elvis bootleg is called I Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star, you know, and he'd be playing Ricky Nelson records with amazing James Burton guitar solos, you know. So it had to get rocking, you know, it had to get rocking.
I try to call my baby, try to get a date. Oh, says no dice, kid, you gotta really late. Sometimes I wonder what I'm gonna do, but there ain't no cure for the summertime blues.
The main thing would be an electric guitar. And we were naive enough to think that the switch over just to an electric guitar would be it. You know, we had no drum kit, we had no bass guitar, we had no backing vocals like that you would hear on a record of the time. So, but you know, we thought, okay, that's what was missing, the electric guitar.
The third album, Unicorn, they started expanding the sound by bringing in electric guitar. Tony Visconti played piano on a song, and they started building up the sound.
I went to see him with Steve Took in Tyrannosaurus Rex at the Albert Hall, and I think he was support for The Who. And he played a bit of electric guitar. And I thought, wow, his guitar playing's coming on, you know. And I went backstage afterwards and I said to him, hey, well done, Marc, you know, you're really playing well now, you know. And he said, yeah, no Jimi Hendrix though. And then he went over to his guitar and he struck a match and pretended to set fire to his guitar, which he knew would get me because I was the guy who came up with the idea for Hendrix setting fire to his guitar.
Perhaps on Unicorn was the first time that we actually saw, this is really good. This is we're going in the right direction, because we emulated the Beach Boys a lot. I know it's very hidden, but I know exactly what we were listening to at the time. But we still didn't crack it. There were no hits off Unicorn, although to me it's one of the most pleasing, and it's probably the best Tyrannosaurus Rex album.
It's okay doing acoustic music, although gradually it was becoming more electrical, but you need, in the studio, you need the expertise of somebody who knows what they're doing with the faders, really. And Tony Visconti could do that.
Anyone in Marc's setup who had any kind of aggressive personality was eliminated. Steve Peregrine Took was the first one who kind of wanted to assert himself. He wanted to share, Took to like go mad, you know, do anything you want. He would disappear for days and come up with something that would be so far out, and so he would out-Zappa Frank Zappa with his ideas. That was not the way we were going to sell pop records or millions of records.
Steve Took got very heavily into LSD. And was into discovering the greater truth, which, you know, and Marc said to me, I'll never forget it, he said, I left him in a wardrobe in New York looking for God. And then Marc went looking for a new partner.
They were very, very a psychedelic hippie sort of love power band. He had lots of those hippie sort of principles. It was all love and things like that. Not as if he did change his principles, but he perceived, and everyone perceived, that things had changed drastically in the market, and bands like Zeppelin were coming along, and bands like Free were taking over, and rock was beginning to move.
So the only
aware of being a pop star and wanting to be a pop star and wanting to be in the charts and wanting that lifestyle.
Steve wanted to keep it a hippie thing, and Marc wanted to progress and to become a star.
You will find that Steve Peregrine Took was not with Marc Bolan after that period. And in fact, that's where Mr. Mickey Finn comes in.
Mickey had been my long-term friend. Mickey I'd known since Mickey had been part of Granny Takes a Trip.
Mickey Finn was, in order to be handsome, charming, lovely man who played the bongos all right.
Mickey, in the Tyrannosaurus Rex, when he first came in, was imitating something which Steve Took invented. And that, of course, was because at the time, that's what Marc wanted.
Having Mickey Finn there also meant that he wasn't complaining about the electric guitar, because he was just happy to be there. And you know, Marc wanted to make the decisions that was fine by him, so he was along for the ride.
And suddenly we've got a fourth album looming. They go into the studio, and when the engineers and producer come into the studio, they're greeted by not the usual but electric guitars.
It was a matter of getting off being cross-legged on the stage, plugging in the guitar, shaking it up, and wham bam, thank you ma'am, you know.
Mickey Finn was a rock and roller, and he was a real basic guy, a cool guy. I really liked him. And that was another missing element, that Marc needed a little bit of more grounding. He needed a bit more grounding, which Mickey Finn provided for him.
He knew Mickey Finn from somewhere before. They'd either worked together or he was on the scene around, and he saw him as a very good-looking kind of clothes horse figure that could do a little bit of back and look good. It was the look.
Mickey was the court jester who made Marc laugh, and made, it was a feel-good factor.
That initial transformation from Tyrannosaurus Rex to T-Rex, it did upset quite a few fans. The actual decision to change the name to T-Rex is to do with Tony Visconti, who was producing them at the time. He'd actually discovered Tyrannosaurus Rex. He was on a mission to find the next Beatles.
I was tired of writing Tyrannosaurus Rex every day on my calendar. I can't even pronounce it. And I put T-Rex on like Monday, Tuesday, and I'd write T-Rex, T-Rex, T-Rex. And Marc came in one day and he saw that and he goes, "Hey man, I don't like that." He goes, "The name of the group's Tyrannosaurus Rex, man." And I said, "I'm sorry, Marc, but I'm going to get writer's cramp if I write Tyrannosaurus Rex for every month, every day of the month." So he went, "Okay," And shortly afterwards, he changed the name to T-Rex.
Marc was very much a hero of the underground because all the hippies loved him, and no hippie gig was complete without Tyrannosaurus Rex. So there were rumblings of discontent when he launched T-Rex and suddenly became this proto-rock star.
If you have a really long name, it's going to be little on the poster or any graphic, If you have a short name, you can make it bigger, i.e. more visible, Tyrannosaurus Rex was a great name, very evocative name, but it wasn't the sort of thing that would trip off a housewife's tongue.
People were finding it difficult to pronounce Tyrannosaurus Rex. I think Tony Blackburn or some DJ couldn't even say the word properly. So Marc didn't initially go with it, but then eventually he did.
Tony Visconti was a very, very able producer, and he came from a different environment. He came from New York. He'd been producing Bowie for a long time. His principle was to make records that were radio friendly.
Marc Bolan sort of reinvented himself as T-Rex and went into the more rockier side and stuff, that he came up with the more contemporary sort of music.
It's like a worship for me to write, because I don't do it. It's like I'm being used by melody as a being, if you want, and there are certain chords that just, there are magic mists within those chords. You play a sort of C major chord, and I hear like 25 melodies and symphonies up here. I've just got to pull one out.
One week we were promised our very first front page on the Melody Maker. It would have been the first music paper front page. And the music papers were very important. You had Melody Maker, NME, Sounds, Record Mirror. And it didn't happen. At the last minute it fell through, but somebody else got on the cover, And I was very upset. Marc said, "Don't worry, man, there's going to be plenty."
As T-Rex, Marc really wanted something that was bigger. He wanted to be a rock and roll star. And what had happened was he was getting a bit moody about these things, and his wife at the time, his first wife, June Child, just got fed up, and she said, "Right, go on. Go into the bedroom, and I'm going to lock you in there, and tomorrow morning when I come out, I want you to have written at least, a few songs, and we're going to stick it on this album, because I'm just fed up with this." And so Marc went in there, locked himself away, and the following morning the story goes that June came in with this cup of coffee and said, "Okay, what have you done?" And he produced this track, Ride a White Swan, and he said, "Yeah, I'm happy with this."
Marc was an opportunist who always wanted to be a star, and that's what sometimes I think people forget. And he always said it, he was quite open about it. I want to be a rock and roll star, I want to be Elvis Presley, I want to be bigger than the Beatles, you know. And when he saw the opportunity to dump one aspect of it, he moved very swiftly on to the next stage, that was Ride a White Swan.
Ride a White Swan was our first big hit record. We were doing everything the same basically, but probably less of it. When you listen to that record carefully, it's very, very stripped down. There's one guitar, maybe two guitars. There's a little guitar overdub. There's a bass guitar. It's the first time we used bass on a T.REX single. There's no drum kit. The rhythm is all in the guitar playing. And one main element that's different from all the rest is we added a string section, which was going to be a signature sound of T.REX for at least the next 2 years.
Ride a White Swan was the first complete change from the old Tyrannosaurus Rex to T.REX. They actually became from a totally album-orientated band to a band that was driven by hits.
At number 25. And then it was kind of around. You'd hear it occasionally. Radio had started to pick up on it.
It took time for people to sort of to realise that they liked it.
And suddenly it was not reissued or re-promoted, I think is the word we're looking for, re-promoted, and bang, it goes up to number 2.
I remember when Ride a White Swan was first released, and he started to get a little bit downhearted, and he was angry. I'd never seen him angry before, and he was very bitter that the radio weren't playing Ride a White Swan, and he was complaining that it wasn't going up the charts, and he really felt that it should do. He put everything into that record, and it meant an awful lot to him. But then, a couple of weeks later, miraculously, Ride a White Swan started to take off.
It got picked up, I think, by a couple of DJs, and it was a fluke hit.
There was no overnight success. We really worked hard for that. And we kind of floated around, you know, a couple of feet off the ground the rest of the day, and I don't think it really sunk in for about 2 or 3 days that we finally had a hit record.
That's when the teens started to take a bit of interest in him. The young girls started to take interest, and then he picked up on that quite quickly.
DJ started to play it, and the public went bananas. The teenage population discovered Marc Bolan, and overnight, virtually, he was elevated from being an icon of the hippie generation and the King's Road into becoming a nationwide pop idol.
People in this country for years, and overnight, he's suddenly got this whole new audience of little teeny, weeny, beany, pop pixie children.
And it was very different, you know. I think that's why he's such a legend nowadays, because you had all the blues stuff coming through in the late 60s, and all that sort of free and bands like that, and then comes along this little guy with a guitar playing Ride a White Swan.
It is a very simple song, but just great. I think his vocal, because before Marc's vocal was always a bit slurred, and he had this particular diction thing going on, and the trem on his voice, and it's still there in Ride a White Swan. You know, you have to listen close to actually hear about the lyric itself. But you know, fantastic delivery, and already his vocal was starting to mellow out a bit. His diction was becoming a bit clearer, much more commercial again, much more pop oriented.
And so suddenly the whimsical fairy tale had a backbeat, and suddenly the poetry had volume, and suddenly girls were looking at his trousers, and suddenly the audience looked like Marc Bolan.
Changing the style of the music slightly allowed it to reach a mass audience, really.
Was it premedité?
No, not at all. It just sort of came into it, you know. It moved into the realm of sort of commercial music on its own, really. I think it's probably the only way that it can happen.
Once Ride a White Swan had been out, they brought out their first album as T.REX.
T.REX's first album as T.REX was a self-titled album. It was actually their last album as a duo. At that stage, Marc Bolan and Mickey Finn had this kind of, it was on an even partnership, I suppose. Marc hadn't quite taken the centre stage just yet.
It was also possibly not the first T.REX album, but the last Tyrannosaurus Rex album.
Marc was still toying around with these sort of slightly mystical lyrics that he was very interested with, kind of elves and witches and things like that.
Oh, I thought it was great. I mean, tracks like Jewel, you know, they really rock out. They're kind of light in a way, but the guitaring's lovely.
The T.REX album is still very much a bridging album with a lot of the Tyrannosaurus Rex sound, and the T.REX sound hasn't really been totally formed.
Great album, you know, and it married the old and the new together. Again, you know, the Wizard, One Inch Rock, a lot of stuff left over that he thought was sort of faves, and blended them in together with his new sound and his new look.
I always felt that Marc Bolan, though, he should be a rock and roller, because he was a rock and roller, so why not bloody well rock and roll? You know, bass, drums, hit the thing, let's go, plug in, let them scream, great.
Marc said, I want to do this with a band. Finally, it was his decision. In the interim, we actually did a couple of gigs together. Because of Ride a White Swan, I did a few gigs on bass with T.REX. And one day, you know, Marc realized I couldn't be the band's bass player because I was producing other people, and I couldn't go on the road. And he said, I found a guy called Steve Curry. So Steve joined the group first, and he was all set to play on the next single, which was Hot Love. And Marc needed a drummer.
Thank you.
Well, I was playing in a band in Southend called A Legend, and we was making an album at Advision Studios, and the producer was Tony Visconti.
Now Bill, I always thought was a great drummer. He was very basic, and then when you wanted Bill to play a fill, it was that lovely, warm, slow, cascading Ringo Starr kind of fill. So I said to Marc, I think I found your drummer for the recording session. We were just booking Bill for 15 quid.
The funny thing about it was I went out and bought all the old Tyrannosaurus Rex albums, and I'd never heard of this, you know. And yet when I actually went to do the session, it was totally different.
She's my woman of gold, she's not very old. She's my woman of gold, she's not very old.
I just walked into the studio, said hi, and sat down and we did the songs. One was Woodland Rock, and the other one was Hot Love. It was a very, very jolly atmosphere at the time, very expectant. And I think what happened was that Ride a White Swan was number 2, and he had high hopes for everything. I mean, it was all pretty new to me, but he looked pretty happy at the time. And Steve had just joined the band, and Mickey was dancing and tiptoeing around like he always does, you know. But yeah, it was a good atmosphere going on.
By the end of the session, Marc fell in love with Bill, and he said, you know, you're going to join my band, you're in my band. And he says, oh, okay, but I'm already in a band. He goes, nope, you're in my band. And what's your name? He goes, Bill Fifield. He goes, I don't like that, you're in a band called Legend, I'm going to call you Bill Legend.
I started out, you know, just with 2 people, and slowly I augmented it when I thought I could cope with it, you know, but I enjoyed working with perhaps the string section, so there's a lot of people. I wouldn't want to have that responsibility of having to work with them all the time. You know?
But this is your basic T.REX group of 4 players.
Sure, yeah, and it's a question of economics as well, believe it or not. I mean, to go on the road is incredibly expensive. You know, we have to find £1,000 a week before you even play. You know?
She ain't no witch, and I love the way she treats you.
That's the first single, the first song that you can actually hear the sound, which really sort of summarises T.REX. You've got this slightly folky element, you've got some of the electric guitars in there, and you have these really bizarre backing vocals. It was very unusual even at the time. And I mean, in a way, they're almost slightly childish sounding, perhaps, the backing vocals, but that was what made that sound.
I think one of the nice things about Hot Love was that it sounded like everybody was having fun. It brought back fun and you know, and entertainment. And Marc brought back with his, you know, with the clothes that he was starting to wear, he brought back entertainment into music.
I think it was a simple track with a lot of air in it, and not too cluttered, and I think that was the magic of it.
She ain't no witch, and I love the way she treats you.
Steve Curry, the bass player, and Bill Legend, the drummer, they were lovely cats. But T.REX wasn't, say, like the Beatles, you know, where it's more of a cooperative thing. It was Marc's band, but they were there by his choice. They were there because they were great for the job, and they were lovely geezers.
We had a couple of weeks rehearsal, and the next thing I remember was being in the 707 going to New York, first gig, Detroit, within a month.
That was the classic lineup, Mickey, Steve, Bill, some bloke called Marc. At that stage, it was fun to be with them. It was a family. You were all part of the family. All I mean, there was them. There was BP Fallon, and there was Mick O'Halloran and myself. We were all family in June, and they treated us like that.
When they put out Hot Love, this was it. This was the real deal. You could see a pattern forming. You could see that they became like the Stones and the Who and the Beatles and the Kinks in the early days. They started to put together a string of hits that you can look back on and think, bloody hell.
Get It On, I suppose, is one most people remember. And I think it's probably been used a lot in TV advertising. It's sort of, I don't know, there's something about the theme that sticks in your mind and it encapsulates the 70s, really. It's sort of optimistic and groovy and hedonistic and having fun.
Marc's guitar riff and the drum figure that brings it. I mean, that just kicks it off right there.
Get it on, bang on, get it on, down, ow, ow, ow. You know, those snaps. Fantastic.
You do this, getting back to your back, and I love you. You do this sweet, oh yeah. You're silly, you got the teeth of the high.
was the one that went straight to #1. It didn't just hang around the charts a bit. That was it. T.REXtasy was in full flow. And Get It On was much like Hot Love in the kind of the style of music. It was slightly electric guitars, and it was, he dropped some of that sort of mystical element as well. It was quite a sort of a sexy song.
I remember him playing Get It On and me thinking, Mark, you're not Bob Dylan. And the number of times I can turn on the TV and hear Get It On now still absolutely shocks me, you know, that some music has a currency that just makes it continuously fresh in the present, whenever it was made.
Get It On it was a more sort of a gutsier single than Hot Love.
You do sweet black, don't look back, and I love you. You're dirty and sweet, oh yeah.
It has some very special people playing on it. Firstly, you've got Rick Wakeman, who was at his majestic, huge glittery cloak bass, playing piano on it.
You don't notice the keys so much playing, production probably why, but you don't notice the keys playing Wakeman when he does this whole run down the keys, which you hear. So that's his sort of contribution, I suppose, really, is that run down the keys.
You have got Ian MacDonald, who not only played saxophone for Foreigner, but played saxophone for King Crimson, and was a King Crimson member, to be quite honest. Yes, he's playing saxophone on it.
And the saxophone, Ian MacDonald's playing probably could have been used more, would have been nice, but it works, and that sound, again, was copied on 70s glam rock acts.
It was really the only song that actually had a decent chart position in America, and this was the bane of Marc Bolan's career, really, or his life, was he wanted to get his stuff heard in America. He wanted to get out to this American audience.
Get It On was probably one of their best records. I mean, they also had some credibility. You know, they had the guy from King Crimson playing on it. They've also done the Top of the Pops with Elton John's been on it. It's like everyone liked T.REX. Everyone thought they were a credible band.
People who hadn't sort of discovered T.REX with Ride a White Swan, they'd either discovered them by Hot Love, or if not, certainly by Get It On. And so obviously Electric Warrior was just the album that went with that, and really, I think, brought in a lot more fans.
Now is the time to seize the moment, and I think Mark took the chance, and in the process produced, along with Tony Visconti, one of the classic albums.
1, 2, buckle my shoe.
The Electric Warrior album was the first album that I played on, and it was during that first tour that we started to record it. Did a lot of stuff in Los Angeles. Get It On was recorded in Los Angeles, and so it was quite a defining time, really, with the band knitting together, getting an understanding and gelling.
You got the teeth that hide upon you. You're dirty, sweet, no my girl. Get it on, bang a gong. Get it on, get it on, bang a gong. Get it on.
Bill was a great drummer, and Steve was a great bass player. The two of them were probably one of the best rhythm sections that I've ever worked with. And when you hear those records, they were made, we didn't labor all day over one song. We would record about 6 songs in one day. They could just knock them out. You know, they were really hardcore, really good rock musicians.
We never rehearsed any of the stuff. I mean, you go in the studio and you didn't know what you was going to do. The songs would just be laid on you. And that, I think, really, in a way, that's why they were so potent.
Marc Bolan was here, and the world was getting to know about him, and that album certainly was his ship or his plane that carried him.
you know, which of course obviously as teenagers are sort of reaching puberty and starting to pick up sort of things like that. You know, Bleached on the Beach, I Want to Tickle Your Peach, it's a rip-off.
A lot of the Marc vibe was to do with upfulness and fun and kind of sexy teasing kind of thing, you know.
It was just wonderful to put out a T.REX record and see it just go to #1 or enter the charts at 3 and be #1 next week.
They hit a peak. They actually were in the groove. They got all the songs right. Tony was producing brilliantly with them.
All of these songs would have been done as acoustic demos and presented in that form. And then this guy's had the vision to see Get It On, Mambo Sun, Jeepster, all taken on, you know, that big, huge, pop, beautiful level of perfection.
You know, there were tracks like that, Life's a Gas and Monolith, that were just slightly slower, a little bit more folky, but by that stage, a lot of the hippies that had been into the band originally when they used to sit cross-legged on the floor, they really thought that that album was a sellout. But at the end of the day, Marc Bolan didn't want to just have this cult status. He wanted to be a big star. He wanted to be #1. He wanted to have hordes of screaming fans after him.
Life's a Gas. I mean, I was a T.REX fan, but I found that one a bit hard to swallow, just because it was so perfectly sweet and sugar candy production. But I didn't want sweet and sugar candy. I wanted my lean woman blues, which again, listen to Dylan, early Dylan with the electric guitar. It's almost could have come from any of those early Dylan albums.
With the sky in his hand and I'm blue.
I used to go to Marc's house in Marble Arch, and across his lounge he had albums stacked from one end to the other, and looking at them there were just too many to kind of pull out, but he was certainly into Bob Dylan. I think Bob Dylan would have been one of his main influences.
I was always surprised that the Americans didn't take to it more. In the United States, they liked it, but it was still a little bit of an underground thing. They could have left Europe for 6 months, done America, come back for a couple of months, then gone back to America, and no one would have noticed a difference. Because they were in every magazine, they were doing every television interview, they were doing everything you could ever want to do. Everyone was talking about T.REX. T.REX became part of the pop rock establishment. They were there and they were thought of as brilliant.
Electric Warrior is that album that made everybody sit up and take notice, and everybody said, okay, T.REX, they're here to stay.
Well, I was very flattered because all the Beatles in their own way said that we were like their successors. I'm not sure that it's true, but I'm very, very flattered. It's nice, it's an encouraging thing, you know.
Marc Bolan's record label with T.REX was Fly Records, and the Electric Warrior album was the final album that was released on Fly Records. It was a sort of contractual obligation, and
Marc was then trying to find another angle because he'd successfully been a chameleon and moved the whole thing once. I always get the impression that he was looking to do it again.
Certainly there's been a change in England in 2 years, and we are part of the change. I mean, guys now can wear makeup, they can shout and scream, and they can and say that I can now go on television on a news program. I don't know even what this is for, but in England I can go on a news program, right, and say my mind.
You look like a zebra, your sunken face is like a galleon, caught with mysteries of the Spanish main. Oh, Deborah, dug me dug, la 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 la, dug me dug, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. Dug me dug, dug me dug, we dug, dug me dug, dug me dug, we dug, Deborah, you're always dressed like a conjurer. It's fine to see your young face smiling neath the stallion that I